For the African continent to attract investments, it will need to resolve its challenges that hinder foreign direct investment. That was the message at the inaugural African Investment Forum that took place in Sandton, Johannesburg this week. President Cyril Ramaphosa hailed the forum as a milestone which will reshape the continent. The president delivered the keynote address.
Last night was a wonderful night, and I saw business people who have come here to South Africa relaxing and enjoying themselves. It is with this in mind that I have a great deal of pleasure to welcome you to South Africa, particularly to this inaugural Africa Investment Forum. I wish to commend the African Development Bank, the continent's preeminent financial institution, for convening this forum. But I also want to thank our government here in Gauteng for having agreed to be a partner with the African Development Bank to host this forum together with the national government of the Republic of South Africa. The Africa Investment Forum is a significant milestone in our quest to reshape the fortunes of the African continent. The forum is indeed a platform for African governments and businesses, continental and international financial institutions, and other development partners to focus on the critical task of making Africa the next global frontier in investment, but more particularly in growth. Over the next few days, we will share experiences as well as best practice. We will outline strategies for growing our economies as the African continent, and most importantly, we will connect financial institutions, project sponsors, institutional investors, and other stakeholders with a view to concluding transactions. Indeed, this is a marketplace to do deals and to conclude transactions. Africa is indeed a continent on the move. It is indeed a continent on the rise. It has experienced significant growth over the last 2 decades, and this has largely been fueled in part by improved governance and deepening democracy through a number of countries on our continent. Rising incomes have seen the growth of the middle class, and an increase in consumer spending has followed in tow. With substantial urban growth, ready internet access that many of our people now have, abundant resources, and a large youthful population, African countries have enormous potential to leverage the technological advances towards the fourth industrial revolution. They have the potential to forge a new world of work that fosters innovation and entrepreneurship. To realize this potential, Africa needs to invest in the skills and capabilities and well-being of its people. Africa needs to empower its youth. It needs to also empower its women so that they can fuel the growth that we are bound to have on our continent. It needs to improve governance as well and promote peace and stability. Most importantly, if Africa is to seize the opportunities of the future, it needs to mobilize large-scale sustained investment, but more particularly in infrastructure. African governments cannot do this on their own. They need their partners to be able to harness the energy that Africa has. They need the private sector. The private sector and private markets are key players in African investment landscape, supported by the lending capacity of financial institutions, both on the continent and beyond the continent. If we are to unlock and sustain the flow of capital to Africa, we need to drive the economic reforms that are necessary to create an enabling business and investment environment. To be globally competitive, to become investment destinations of choice, we need to resolve the problems that keep investors away from our continent. We have to address governance challenges such as policy uncertainty, policy inconsistency, financial mismanagement, as well as corruption. As African leaders, we must demonstrate a firm commitment to act against corruption both within the public sector as well as the private sector. We must also deal with what potential investors always raise with us, which is regulatory difficulties that they have. We must provide policy and regulatory certainty and strengthen our own financial institutions. The Africa Investment Forum provides, therefore, a welcome platform for us to outline the work we are doing to create what you could call a more enabling environment for investors in Africa. It is also an opportunity that we now have for us to listen to the concerns as well as the suggestions of business leaders and to draw lessons from what they are suggesting to us to enable us to act. This forum is aligned to the key aspiration of the African Union's Agenda 2063 of a prosperous and integrated Africa, but an Africa that is characterized by inclusive growth and sustainable development. Agenda 2063 has a resource mobilization strategy that relies on the identification and expansion of investment partnerships to propel the growth of our continent. The economic transformation of the continent is in the end dependent on all our efforts to move industrial and infrastructure projects to bankable stages or levels, to raise capital and to accelerate the financial closure of deals. This is what this forum presents us, to be able to close those deals. And I was particularly pleased when President Adesina said, at this forum, we are going to see almost $28 billion of deals being closed. That is phenomenal, and we are going to see it here. International partnerships such as the G20 Compact with Africa, a number of heads of state who are here with us today were in Germany, where Chancellor Angela Merkel hosted the G20 Africa Compact. And that in itself can make an important contribution to this growth, while offering investors significant opportunities to do business across the continent. The Compact is geared towards strengthening macroeconomic business and financing frameworks across the continent to promote private investment from companies in G20 countries. The potential of this initiative was evident in Berlin, where a diverse range of investors announced plans to invest in various projects in participating African countries. African integration is key to attracting investment and growing our respective economies. The adoption of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement in March this year is a historic development that has the potential to fundamentally change African economies. This is a free trade area that has never really been seen in the world. It is going to be the largest integrated market on the African continent, which is a clear demonstration that indeed Africa is not only on the rise, but Africa is on the move. The expansion of intertrade in Africa through the Continental Free Trade Area will contribute to better policy harmonization and trade liberalization and facilitation regimes. It should enhance industry competitiveness. It will also expand continental market access and lead to the better allocation of resources. What it is also going to do, it is going to unleash the potential of our continent with regard to industrialization, with regard to the manufacturing industry. We are going to see a whole host of factories rising on the continent, because once the continent is integrated as we envisaged, as a single market, consumers are going to want to be the active participants, and therefore entrepreneurs and investors will find a ready market in the consumers that are replete on our continent. This will be good for investors who will have a market of more than 1.2 billion people and a combined GDP of more than $3.4 trillion. Economic integration, whether at continental or regional level, will further deepen the interconnectedness of all our African economies. The fortunes of any country will be even more closely dependent on the fortunes of all countries. As South Africa, this informs our approach to investment and development. We know that as a country, much as we are at the tip, southern tip of the continent, we are intricately linked to the whole continent. We, as a country, have launched an ambitious investment drive, as the Premier David Makura was saying, to raise $100 billion in new investment over the next 5 years. This is vital to reigniting growth in our economy and creating jobs on a far greater scale. 2 weeks ago, we held the inaugural South African Investment Conference here in this very venue, where several companies announced, and in fact were competing to announce, the new investments that they wanted to effect in our economy. And in the end, 290 billion rand of investment, an equivalent of $20 billion, was announced as active investments that are going to come into our economy.
Finance Minister Tito Mboweni also participated in the forum. Let's listen to a discussion that he participated in.
We make our contributions in the G20 system, which should benefit the whole world, really. I've tried to make the example of the banking system, the financial system. If the global financial system is safe and secure, Africa will, by definition and by logical extension, also benefit from that. Of course, we debate about all kinds of obstacles which are being brought, for example, in the number of economic regulations around the world. If we're able to sort those ones out at that G20 level, that has an impact as well on African countries. But a lot as well has to be done by ourselves as the African countries so that we can expand the compact countries from 12 to 20 to 54 and so on. And some of the issues are basic that we need to do. Setting up, for example, predictable macroeconomic policy frameworks, obtaining a sovereign rating in order to facilitate investment flows, signing double taxation agreements with a number of countries so that corporations can benefit from those arrangements. So it's a conversation that takes place within the G20 set of countries, but also within ourselves on the continent. There's a lot of work we need to do to make ourselves an attractive investment destination. Maybe there's something that we might be missing here. You see, in the 70s and 80s and part of the 90s, the IMF and the World Bank came with a hammer to try and kill a mosquito. And they called it structural adjustment programs, which were imposed on African countries, sometimes making it almost impossible for those countries to manage their affairs. Now, that was the IMF and the World Bank approach at that time. Watch the difference with the Compact for Africa. This is not an imposition of policies on African countries, but it's an encouragement of investment in African countries in a manner which benefits the investor and the African countries.
So, Minister,
so
even
very,
from
very
the
important.
naming convention, as President Adesina mentioned earlier,
Yes.
this is not the compact for Africa, it's a compact with Africa.
Yes.
Just following on your train of thought.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's very important that we approach it like that. And Norway has a very good experience, which maybe the minister will talk about, because the Norwegians noticed that this thing of providing aid is not helpful. It's helpful to some extent, but it's not the solution. So they got together with the Dutch and formed an organization called Arise. They use Arise as an instrument to find local partners in Africa, invest in Africa, so that the local partner has an interest in the development of the business, and by so doing gets the wheels of the economy moving. I think that's a good example.